Welcome everyone. The first Turkish DocuWeek organized by Yunus Emre Institutes of Berlin, Zagreb, and Belgrade. And we have two distinguished guests together with us for the talk, Montage's Rewriting Audiovisual Narration in Documentary Cinema. Although we don't have to be just limited with documentary cinema, we can talk about generally films and editing. And we have Nataša Damjanović from Belgrade and Amsterdam, who is a film editor by formation and also a film producer.
Belgrade and The Hague.
Okay, from The Hague. Sorry, it's easy to say. I was trying to tell the cities instead of countries. Okay, thanks for the correction. And we have Eytan İpeker from Istanbul and Berlin, a filmmaker, director, and editor. Welcome you both again. So I would like to start with Nataša. Nataša, you are a film editor, film producer, and you also edit the films you produce or co-produce from time to time. So generally, in which stage of the production, ideally, you prefer to start to be involved?
Well, of course, I like to get involved very early on, as early as possible. Like even if I'm just editing the film and not also producing it, very often I'm involved from like the very first idea and the very first draft. Simply because I tend to work with the directors for longer periods of times and more of their films, and we kind of have a relationship, and so I always read the scripts as well and give comments and so on. And I find that it's very valuable to have an editor's point of view in script phase as well, because it's not called script editing for nothing. There's very much of let's say similar logic that you use in script editing as well, that you use in later on during the editing phase. And that's also why I think we are talking about writing and rewriting in the editing today, So yeah, I like to get involved very early on if possible.
And also, this is our first conversation talk during the Turkish DocuWeek. Sorry for my excitement. I forgot to give this info that Nataša is the editor of Unplugged that we are screening this week, and Eytan is the editor of Mimaroğlu, the Robinson of Manhattan Island that we are screening, and both of the films are the two films that we screen in the opening day on Monday, 19th of April. And so Eytan, so also you have several skills in your hands, as we would say maybe in Turkish. So you direct, edit, and even produce both documentary fiction and experimental films, and you edit your own films as well as the films of other directors. So as an editor, like your editing experience, how does it help to your directing, and your directing experience, how does it help when you edit your own films or the films of other directors?
Well, I think it has pluses and minuses, actually. It's not always positive to have two skills sometimes, I have to say. But let's start on the plus side. So the good thing is, when you are directing, you definitely are thinking about how it's going to come together, how the shots are put together. You are thinking what you can shoot and how, for example, in a documentary context specifically, you know that you can go there and take XYZ shots, and then they will work together in a certain sequence. It's like, it's easier to visualize how the film is constructed, I think. And you are really coming from a perspective of, a bit like imagining the blueprint and then shooting. And of course, as you can imagine, sometimes the downside of that is knowing thinking that the blueprint is not always good, because sometimes you have set in your mind certain shots and you have to more interact with what's happening So for me as a director, actually, I mean, I think I have maybe sometimes too much editing skills. So I think it's really sometimes it's good, but it's also you're trying to also become, like, you know, more open and less thinking about, you know, how the shots are going to come together. This is also important. And yeah, as an editor, having directed, I think it really helps me to understand, you know, where the directors are coming from. I mean, how they are attached to their footage in a certain way, like going at location and shooting something. For me, it's always similar to having a tattoo for me, you know, like it's really become part of you, what happened that day, what the situation was, how the cinematographer was reacting to what you wanted to do, all those little things. And yeah, as an editor, I definitely feel the directors, how they are sensitive to you know, keeping or not having something in the cut, and try to be, I guess, maybe more gentle with them. It just creates an empathy for me.
So I guess also that I will go back and forth between you two, because you have very similar approaches. Also like Nataša, so your editing skills also makes you maybe more, let's say, seductive for some of the directors who want to work with you, and knowing that you are a producer as well. Like, do they also openly approach you that way?
Well, actually, I'm not sure. I mean, I think a lot of them do appreciate my editing skills in terms of, you know, what it can bring to the table, especially in terms of this kind of empathy and sensibility that Eytan just mentioned, that maybe sometimes some directors think some producers lack. Because, you know, sometimes they can get sort of stuck in this a little bit of a narrow view of things. So maybe in that sense, yes. But actually, I mean, I also produce a lot of things that I don't edit, and, you know, sometimes it's just not. It's not about that, but it can definitely be an asset, and I think it does give me a little bit of a unique view and approach. Because yeah, as a producer, of course, you always follow your project from the beginning to the very end, but that doesn't necessarily have to do with the story, you know, but more like with the technical things. And then, you know, when you have an editor in you as well, then you're always looking at the story as well. So maybe that's the unique point, if you will.
And Eytan, you, like, I can imagine, like, now you start to edit a lot of documentaries of the, let's call, new Turkey, documentaries from Turkey, and maybe also, like, you being a director can be helpful for some directors. I can imagine they also would like to collaborate with you, knowing this.
Yeah, I think this is probably you're probably right on this. I mean, without, you know, whatever, I have to be humble, but I think, yeah, because sometimes with documentary especially, I think is a specific case, because documentaries, you know, it's a bit, especially if you're making, I'm talking specifically about more art house type documentaries, when it's not specifically scripted from the beginning. So yeah, there's, in the editing, there's a lot of actually writing, even though you're not, sometimes you are literally writing, sometimes you are just, you know, by putting things before or after you are writing, but, you know, you are really structuring the film and trying to find what the film is in the editing. And yeah, so my experience as a director, where I had to, you know, write a lot, like the footage, and do paper edits, and then, you know, like all the process that even I working with like foreign languages, all of this stuff, yeah, it's really helpful, and I try to be as much involved as possible with the script in a way. Even though it's not script per se, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, like audiovisual narration.
Yeah, it becomes a script for sure. So I'm co-script writing in a way in most cases.
Yeah, and like I think if you want to sort of compare it to fiction, because I've done a little bit of both. I mean, it's called rewriting in the title of our talk, but when it comes to documentaries, it's much more writing. You know, like you said, finding the film in the editing room. I mean, fiction films usually, of course, not all of them. It depends, you know, how the director works, but are a lot more scripted in advance, you know, than documentaries are. And in those terms, I could maybe even say that for me as an editor working on documentaries, I wouldn't say it was more exciting, but you know, I don't want to compare the two in that sense, but it's different, and it really gave me a unique kind of pleasure working on it, that a kind of pleasure that I didn't get, not that kind from working, you know, on fiction films. So it is very much a creative, very creative process. I mean, editing is anyways, but especially with documentaries, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry, I think some of it has to do also with the background of the directors. You know, the directors. You know, somehow in the fiction, let's say, films, they come from a more maybe it's the process, you know, all the fundings, but it has to be very, let's say, structured and like kind of close to be like you can see the film a little bit with the script, etc. by the time you come to the table. And with the documentaries, the directors they don't necessarily come from, you know, this background. Sometimes they see like an interesting subject and that excites them, and they want to throw themselves in. So there's a lot more space for you to be creative with them.
And yeah, in fact, these things also assisted for our next questions. Like, let's say it will be for both of you. First, Nataša, like you, as a producer or editor, you started in the very early stage, like from the idea. Then the film has been shot, etc. And now you have the footage. You set on the table. And what are the methods or collaboration you need in order to rediscover or to have a distance to the material that you met since the birth?
Yeah, that's a good one. I have to say that the films that I produced and edited, none of them, well, features at least, I'm not talking about shorts, but features I did not edit by myself. So that's one way that you can sort of cope with that, with this, you know, if you think you're tired of the material or too much in it, you know, or lacking perspective or fresh view or whatever. I used to co-edit a lot. And I found that a really, really good way. Of course, you have to find someone with whom you understand each other very well. But I was lucky enough that I had several editors that I could work with. And I really enjoyed that, because it's, if you're sort of on the same path, but you have two, you know, I mean, two heads are always smarter than one. So yeah, that's the way I cope with it very often, having co-editors. Also taking some time off, that helps, you know, like if we're done with the production, I might take like a couple of weeks or even a month off, like not touching it, not looking at it at all, and then come back to it. Yeah, those would be like my main sort of tools, how to deal with that.
And similar question to you, Eytan, also, but in a slightly different way. You also, like, again, direct your own films and edit your films. So now, how do you keep your distance, and how do you reinvent the film in the editing? What kind of help or method collaboration you get?
Yeah, I found that the more the projects get bigger, this working method is becoming more and more difficult, actually, to be honest. So for the last documentary that I did, it was quite challenging for me to, you know, to even watch the material properly, I would say. because like this, going back to this two example, it's really hard to take off this like knowledge of what happened on the shoot and what you were expecting and what you got. For me, it turned out to be a mixture of things, and some of those was good for me, some weren't. So one of the thing was like Nataša said, time is definitely, I put some time off because you need to come with a fresh eye all the time, and you know the material already, or you think you know the material already. So time is definitely good. It took me a long time to edit. Getting feedbacks, that was also very important, but that became dangerous after a while. Then you start to a bit, you question your do I even know what I'm doing anymore? Because after so many feedbacks, this is dangerous. I think that has to be done with like a caution. And finally, in the last round, I worked with an editor actually, who was working as an advisor. So every now and then I showed him my cut, even though he didn't know the material, but it was good to get like a perspective, someone else's perspective, someone that you trust. I did this, I think, 3 times in total, so it wasn't that many, but always. So then I had to choose, how many times I can do this because of the budget constraints, and that was good that it was limited. So those are. And
if I'm not mistaken, Eytan is referring to the documentary he directed, Miss Pageant. Sorry for my pronunciation.
The pageant.
The Miss Pageant, about the beauty contest of the Holocaust survivors in Israel. Yes. So he was sharing his experience on that film. And now we can also now start talking about the films that we are showing during this week in Turkish DocuWeek. So again, going back to Nataša, like I know it has been a while since you worked on Unplugged, but also Mladen Kovačević, the director, also mentioned, because of the, let's say, the looseness, the sincerity of the film is still being shown way after its premiere. So just trying to retrospectively look, how did you come up with the structure and the language of the film together with the director for Unplugged?
I actually rewatched the film last night after 8 years after we made it, because as an editor you watch it so many times that like when it premieres you're like I really cannot, I don't want to see this anymore. But I rewatched it last night, and thank you for making me rewatch it. I have to say that my biggest impression after watching it is that after 8 years, I remember every cut. I remember every decision, how it was made. I was really amazed by that when I was watching it. So it really, even though you have this feeling that you don't want to see it, everything stays, in the back of your mind, how you got there. And it's an interesting one because it's a very good example of exactly what we were talking about, of how much you build the story in the editing room. Because when Mladen came to me, we didn't know each other. We didn't work before. Someone referred me to him, and then we started talking, and he told me what the story was. And of course, the first thing I asked him, does the main character, does he learn how to play the leaf by the end? And he said no. And I was like, okay, now what? Because that would have been the easy way. So we then really needed to, but he was like, I have these characters and they're all really interesting. And we started from that, but characters can carry your film only so much and only so long, and then we really needed to sort of dive deep into every scene, into every material, everything that he shot. And then at some point we just realized that the film was about music, that, you know, and not about how proficient you are, whether you master the instrument or not, but about what music gives you, you know, and whether it's traditional music or modern, doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter if you're a professional or not, you know. And then, you know, when we figured that out, then we knew that was our film, you know, and the rest was, let's say, easy. It wasn't easy, but still, yeah, it was, but it was a long and sometimes painful process to get there.
Of course. And so, like, when we go back to Eytan, like in the documentary Mimar or the Robinson of Manhattan Island, you have like archive footage, you have non-sync audio footage, and you have the interviews that the director has conducted. So, like, when you combine all these different image and audio footages together, like, how did you come up with the rhythm, the structure, and the flow of the film?
Well, the structure was in a very general sense, came from the director. So he always knew he wanted a 3-part structure, but like looking at the same, let's say family, but the same person from different perspectives. And so it wasn't going to be like linear. So that came from the director. But I think with the more specifically, I think we did first the sound editing. We decided to do more to edit it with sound first, so that we can feel like it was working, you know, like as in terms of structure, you know, how we were getting from point A to point B. So after doing that, I think we started it on paper. Then after a while, we stopped and we started work with actual sounds. But then, of course, with the images coming in, of course, things change. Also, you want to pull back on this over-reliance on sound. And sometimes, you know, we realized that we didn't have to say everything, you know, so we started to pull back a bit all this sound, so that the image started to also do, you know, some of the work, let's say. Yeah, and then the rest is really, in more general sense, it was really following the story and the twists and turns, which is the general sort of editing. But yeah, that's what I can say.
And now we talked about, you know, certain methods during the editing process, how to structure, like rewrite, etc. So could you mainly talk about a bit the methods you use? It can be photo boards, like writings, etc. Also for some of our audience who are interested in editing, this might be helpful, I think. We can start with Nataša again.
Yeah. Sometimes I edit on paper. I, you know, like either have like very, very short descriptions of scenes, and then if I'm working with the structure, if I want to move things around, then sometimes I would do it like that on paper, or sometimes even with the sticker notes, you know, like just Post-it notes basically that I put up on a board, and sometimes I would do that, especially if it's like if the changes are, it depends also on the phase of editing when, you know, I'm doing it, and also it depends on, let's say, the scale of the changes that I want to implement, which whether it's easier to do it on paper or in the actual editing program in the sequence. But I prefer, honestly, in my experience, I prefer not to do it on paper. I prefer to do it with the footage whenever I can, because it's just, you know, it's different. It's not, you know, when things are on paper, they can look fine, but then just when you look at it, it makes no sense whatsoever, even though, you know, when it was in Word or, you know, it sounded that was the solution. So, you know, in order to really feel the things, you have to do it, you know, with the actual footage. It's just, there's no way around it.
It's like the book you have read is never like the film you watch.
Pretty much, yeah. I don't know if you agree, Eytan.
I 100% agree. Actually, I was thinking, how interesting this concept of writing is, because, I have to, before you said, because, for example, with the documentary, sometimes you have all the transcripts and you have an idea of the footage, but it's not like you can just sit down and like structure it. For me, I also need to have sort of the visual information. So I watch, and then I have the text, and like, so I don't know how someone just from the technical point of view, it's maybe not in my experience. I don't know how it could be written by someone who doesn't know both the footage and the text. Just the transcript. But yeah, even so, afterwards, I have the exact same experience that you are having. Which is I'm having at the moment with the documentary, by the way. Whereas like it looked really good on paper, everything was so flowing, and this documentary was nice. And then you hear how the character says something, and it doesn't have this excitement that you thought, when you were even if you know. And it changes a lot. With back to the question, I'm not a very organized person, like with like papers and everything, but I think sometimes it really helps when there are too many scenes and you're really trying to find structure with this card. This idea. I do a lot of, when I don't know where I'm going, actually, I do organizing just on the computer. I just keep on organizing things until, things start to connect. And usually the way you organize things actually is kind of a bias, I think. Like, you kind of feel, for example, if you're putting all the inserts in some places, in some sequence, then, this is how you're going to approach the film. Sometimes, this is also interesting, how you organize and how it affects the shape of the film.
Also, the motivation to organize makes you rewatch the footage, so then you get to know it well and you embrace the footage.
Yeah, and I think also taking it out of the context of what the footage originally was is always good. It opens you up to other possibilities.
And also now, while talking, I thought of, in Unplugged and in Mimaroğlu, there are like two different ways of using the interviews. In Unplugged, it's like more of the tableau shots where the character is in his or her environment, and from far looking towards the audience, or probably towards the director in the shooting, towards the camera. So, like, can you also talk about generally the talking heads, how to avoid or how to use them when necessary? That was how it was in Unplugged. We will start with Nataša, and in Mimaroğlu, it's like there is in the film there is no sync interview at all. We just see some audio footage, which are like not all of them are interviews. Some of them are diary recordings. So generally, let's talk about how to use and how to avoid talking heads.
Yeah, I suppose none of us are really fans of talking heads, but somehow we end up with them one way or another in documentaries. In Unplugged, Mladen shot a lot of interviews with them, but he shot them somehow along the way. Most of them weren't really staged as interviews. Some of them were, but early on, also during the shooting, he realized that doesn't really work. So at some point he stopped doing that, and then they were talking, like doing and talking. But then we ended up with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and and at some point we decided, I think, to use most of the interviews as a soundtrack, and to avoid as much as possible the direct talking head into the camera. And what this did, it opened up a lot of space for constructing, for taking constructing not something that those characters didn't say. Obviously they said all of it, but but a lot of times we would just take bits and pieces from, you know, one interview and then the other, and we could put them together because we were using it just as a soundtrack, you know, even though they were in completely different spaces, different, you know, it freed us a lot, you know, in how we could use those that footage and what they were actually saying. We could kind of shift it around a lot more than what would be possible if we were actually using them as, you know, like, okay, now this is an interview. Sorry. Yeah, like I said, in general, I'm not a fan of those. Of course, it depends a lot on the character. You know, some characters you can just look at them, even if they're just sitting and talking, because they're that interesting. But they are not very, I mean, you don't come across those too often, I think. Yeah. So I prefer treating the interviews as a soundtrack always, I would say, almost always.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Mimaroğlu being this film without any talking heads, I would like to make a bit of a case for talking head. But I mean, not having talking, first of all, I think it's as an interesting example, I can bring this in one of the, I was like a jury member in one of these documentary work in progress sessions. And it was really interesting because I saw at some point, through some kind of, let's say, internal like accident, I saw two presentations of the same documentary. And in some cases, you know, it was, there was more talking heads in one cases, and in the other one, you wouldn't see the faces. And it was about this other character that the talking heads were talking about. So it was really interesting because when you saw the talking heads, when you saw the person speaking, you start to pick apart like, okay, what's she wearing? What is, like, you start to get all these biases about this person. Oh, I bet she is this kind of person. And you are looking behind the wall, what she has there, and what kind of furniture is behind her, like, you know, how she did her makeup. You're starting to think about this person and specifically. So, and then without it, of course, it's more focused on what they were saying. So in the example, it was better, I think, without the talking head.
You're not making much of a case for talking heads so far.
Sorry, it's coming to it. You are right. No, but I think, you know, so there are some really great directors that I admire, like Chantal Akerman being a specific example, like who does great talking heads. And in some cases, you know, it's if you really capture a specific moment, you know, there's something kind of dangerous about seeing the person, you know, like, because you know, when you're taking it out of sync, you can make the characters say in the pace that you want, you know, in the order that you want. Sometimes they mumble, you can take that out. So it gives you as an editor some kind of freedom. But when it's actually really on person, and you can get like an interesting shot, though sometimes the person then becomes the focus, and also it's a kind of an acrobatic thing, you know. All their mumbling is there, all their it's just more about the moment and about the person, and it has kind of very different focus. So when it's done in a very controlled way, like sometimes we see in certain, not to overgeneralize, but in certain Netflix documentaries, or sometimes it's not so interesting, but when it's really pushes it to its extreme, it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think I was a little bit too extreme. Of course, it can work sometimes, and I think it doesn't really matter, to be honest. It doesn't matter if you have talking heads or not. If it works, it works. You know what I mean? It's just, you know, it can work fabulously in some films, you know, and with some characters and with some people. And I wouldn't actually generalize in that way, you know, like talking heads are good or not good. I mean, when they are like you know, boring TV stuff, of course I don't like them. No, but I don't like those kinds of documentaries, you know. Maybe sometimes if I'm interested in the subject, I will watch it, but that is not exciting as a film for me, you know. But yeah, sometimes maybe only the talking heads would work, you know, if the film if it makes the film powerful. So yeah, I wouldn't generalize.
Yeah, no, I think it has to do with the way we see these talking heads in this certain type of documentaries that we are like up to here with them.
Yeah,
I think that has to do with it.
And also, like, before we end, just to, you know, this is like a bonus question. Like, would you offer like one or two films, documentaries, doesn't have to be necessarily documentaries, and one or two books, can be on film editing or filmmaking generally, for those books that you, or films that you return to, that you would like to share with us, with others? And we can have a time to think, because these questions I didn't send beforehand.
yeah, that's I have to think about it a little bit. I'm not oh, okay, I have a documentary that I've seen well, not recently, but like now, time flies during Corona. It's already 2 years ago now, I think. It's called Srbenka. I don't know if you've seen it.
I'm taking notes.
It's a Croatian documentary, and I found it really interesting because it's like it's one of those unlikeliest of things. So they started shooting the process of like a making of, basically, of a theater play that became so much more. Of course, it's a subject that is very sort of charged politically and ideologically, and the director of the play is this very specific character. But yeah, maybe that's something I would recommend, because for me that I mean, like Unplugged, also, you can make a film out of anything. I mean, Unplugged was made basically, you know, out of, you know, 3 people walking around blowing in a leaf, you know, and it became a film. So for me, that's also a really important way of looking at things and thinking about things, you know, that anything can become a good film, basically. Yeah.
How about you, Eytan?
Since this pandemic, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the films that, you know, I used to watch in theater, you know, in like, you know, things that now, if I were to watch now, I would be like really bored and like wouldn't have the patience for. So maybe it's not a good recommendation in that sense. But for me, it was really a unique moment when I saw a National Gallery by Frederick Wiseman in the film festival. It wasn't even a good theater, but just it brings me back all these memories of just, you know, just being in the theater. And this film really, I was arguing with this film. I was not sure, like I haven't watched a lot of Wiseman before that. So I like, where is this film going? Okay, I'll wait some more. And all this internal dialogue, I think is really important. And unfortunately, something that we've been missing out a little bit. That's why I think the pacing needs to be faster nowadays. And this, I don't know, maybe it's subjective perception.
Yeah, and I was
go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go.
I have a question. I have a question for Nataša.
Yeah, go ahead.
But this is not related. If you have if you have like a film suggestion, I would love to.
No, please go on. No, it's better this way.
So when you start the project, when you get involved with the project early on, I'm curious, because sometimes I do that as well, and I like that as well. But the thing is, the really tricky thing for me, and I would like to know how you handle this, or you have any insights, is the director is at a really sort of fragile state. So they're starting the project, they have they're going to go on a long journey trying to finance or trying to make it to festivals and all of that. And sometimes it's really a director you want to work with, but and you have criticism of the script sometimes. and to which degree or how I feel sometimes very uncomfortable on how much I can share or how much I can talk. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not just about it's not the question of just wanting to work with the director. It's also, I know that they're at a very fragile point, and some of these things will get resolved later eventually. But I don't know. What is your feeling on this?
It's a very interesting question, because it's of course it also has a lot to do with my character and with my personality. I'm a pretty blunt person. So I have to remind myself and to sort of put effort into, and I learned how to do that over the years, how to be more gentle, how to, you know, phrase things in a way that will be, that will sound less as a critique and more as a, you know, this helpful suggestion sort of thing. But I also think that it really depends on your position and how you approach the projects and the directors. I think that because I'm so much involved from the very beginning, and I'm also so much so close to it. Of course, not as close as the director, but much closer than I would be if I was sort of just servicing, let's say, the production. I think a lot of times the way my criticism is received is, it's not perceived as something, you know, that is hurtful. I think that actually the fact that I'm so involved helps with that. It doesn't take away from it. It helps with that. I didn't really have this. I had this problem and issue sometimes in workshops, when you don't know people and they don't know you, and then you give comments to each other. Sometimes that can be a problem, because then you are perceived as someone from the outside, you know. But on my own projects that I produced and worked on, I didn't really have that problem so much. And yeah, and then in those workshops, that's where the phrasing comes in, and that's something that I really learned how to do. You know, how to package it.
Right.
I don't know if that helps you. But
yeah, that well, it's good to talk even about it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add like two books that came to my mind this morning. The one is typical Walter Murch, In the Blink of an Eye. That's a classic, I guess, from the editor of Apocalypse Now. And there is a book called Cutting Rhythms, Intuitive Editing by Karen Perlman. She's an editor and a film academic from Australia. And that's also very interesting. And it's also translated Turkish.
I write it down.
Yeah, it's like cutting rhythms into intuitive editing. And I think in one of the previous editions, it was called Cutting Rhythms, the Shape of Editing. That's also for me an interesting book. By the way, I'm so interested in editing because I also work as an editing consultant. I don't touch the machines, but I enjoy this because this is the singularity of filmmaking, for my opinion, where it differs from the other crafts and arts. So I think
I would just briefly plug also.
Please.
Just briefly plugging also. It's Hunger by Knut Hamsun, even though it's nothing to do with editing. I'm thinking a lot in the way that like the character contradicts with himself. It's really like really good way to approach, I think, characters in the editing and directing as well, I guess. But it's a novel, but it's just a really good sort of, you know, interesting way to approach the character, which we do actually in the editing. So this could be, I think, helpful.
I'm just thinking now but that's interesting that you said, like, sometimes I would also read literature and I would think, my God, this is so well edited, you know, like, you know, you have novels that have many storylines and you literally see an editing process going on there. Like I remember that's what I thought when I read the book Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I don't know if you read it. It's very good, and it has three storylines in 3 times intertwining throughout the whole book. And it's an amazingly edited book. The way you follow and the way you move from one to another, it's amazing. Yeah, maybe that can be my book recommendation. And of course, Walter Murch. I mean, I would always recommend Walter Murch, even though it's Apocalypse Now is one of the films actually that helped me realize I wanted to be an editor. So yeah, I would definitely always recommend that.
Okay, so I would like to thank you both for this talk together. Today we were together with Nataša Damjanović, the film producer, editor, and editor of Unplugged that we are screening this week during Turkish DocuWeek, and with Eytan İpeker, film director, editor, producer, and editor of Mimaroğlu, the Robinson of Manhattan Island, that we are screening this week during the Turkish DocuWeek. And I hope you all would enjoy this week of watching films, and I hope you enjoyed our talk. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cem.
Bye.
Bye.